I actually had this. I said this on the first episode, our first interview of this series, and it was. It's not that I enjoy studying the Patriot Act. It's also like I don't enjoy flossing, but I think it's necessary. Um, so, okay, you said something about it that once again, a lawyer could probably be the only one that finds something like this, and I hadn't. It's a hole in my looking over the Patriot Act, and I'm going to quote you: "If the government finds that you're talking with the wrong people, you have no right to defend that you never intended to support violence or that no violence occurred or was encouraged." So the gross First Amendment problems with the Patriot Act, I had no idea about. And then you go on to talk about Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project, in which the Humanitarian Law Project was working with the Kurdish Workers' Party, which the Kurdish Workers' Party at the time were dubbed a terrorist organization or a pseudo-terrorist organization, something along those lines. They had probably done violent acts, but what the Humanitarian Law Project was trying to do was get them to speak and talk about issues as opposed to be violent about them. And that then got them in this clause, the Patriot Act. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, and then if you can expand on if things like that have been changed or just gotten worse.
Right. Well, you're talking about there are prosecutions for material support of terrorism. And material support in the context of the Humanitarian Law Project was found to adhere when a nonprofit was trying to encourage conflict resolution, to de-escalate conflict, because the participants in the workshops included militants, according to the US government. That's facilitating terrorism. And that's another example of just idiotic policy. What sense does it make to criminalize efforts to de-escalate conflict? But we should be encouraging efforts to de-escalate conflict, not criminalizing them. But we're so interested, or the national security agencies are so interested in the appearance of effectiveness that they're more interested just in winning convictions, whether or not those convictions in any way advance national security. There is another case in the same vein, another material support for a prosecution case this was in the First Circuit, Boston, and the defendant's name was Tariq Mehana, or Mehana, Mehana, I think. And he was an academic who was translating materials for public discussion, and that was decided to be material support for terrorism. So if you can't encourage conflict de-resolution and you can't translate texts without being held liable by the government for facilitating terrorism, it just begs the question, what are we supposed to do about these issues? And it seems that the government's policy is all we are allowed to do is fight. We can't talk, we can't translate, we can't try to de-escalate. And the idea that the de-escalating or talking or translating is classified as if it was facilitating terrorism, I think is a reflection not just of idiocy, but frankly corruption, because that insulates the system from the kind of accountability that we all frankly need it to have.
Yeah, I had that translation case. That's crazy. That is a flat violation of First Amendment rights. And
that was exactly the argument. It was a First Amendment defense, and the courts, basically overruled it. It was the Humanitarian Law Project was the sort of high watermark or low watermark of these cases at the time. The Mehana case came after I wrote that article, so that's why I raised it, because it got even worse than it was at the time that I wrote that piece.
Wow, that is unfortunate to hear. And then if you team that thought with the rulings or the policy of drone strikes, and how essentially if you're a military age male, regardless, and you're hanging out with other military-aged males in some perceived area of geolocation that says this is of a terrorist holding, drone strikes are all good.
That's exactly how a 16-year-old U.S. citizen born in the U.S. was killed by a drone strike because his father was somebody in which the U.S. government had an interest. And this was, in the case of Anwar al-Awlaki and his son, are so revealing, because this was a father and son pair, U.S. citizens. They were seeking vindication in the U.S. courts of their right to trial at the time that they were, obliterated by a flying robotic assassin robot halfway around the world from where its pilot was. And the idea, and just to be clear, the thing that he was killed for were words. Now, they were insightful words, like words that incited violence. And so maybe there's an issue there that's certainly legitimate for a court to discern, but to just assassinate people based on their words does fly in the direct face of a little thing called the Constitution that we adopted when we created the Republic. And the idea that we're killing people based on their parents' words, like we're into some other zone there, and that's not in any way defensible in any system of law. And that's national policy.